All right, let's get started. So, gosh, thanks so much everybody for being here this evening. It's an absolute delight to spend a little while just immersed in our small but mighty little friends, the Bogong moths. Tonight, I am coming to you from Darug and Gundungurra country, otherwise known as the Blue Mountains. And here at the moment, it is Dagara Gawara, the season of the cold and windy, which today didn't represent, but certainly in the past weeks, it has been freezing cold and windy up here in the Blue Mountains. And I also learned that it's the time when the diamond python, which is Malia, goes and finds mates. And it's super cool because just the other day when I was driving home along my street, a humongous diamond python was crossing the road, heading off and perhaps going to find her mates. So yeah, so it's beautiful country up here in the Blue Mountains, of course, and we're very pleased to and privileged to be here. I've got my name's Kate Umbers. I'm the Managing Director of Invertebrates Australia. I'm also an Associate Professor at Western Sydney Uni, and I'm leading some research on bogong moths, trying to understand their migration and other things. And I've got three wonderful people with me tonight to have a good old yarn about bogongs. So I've got Mick Hanby from Tanarung Land and Water Corporation, sorry, Mick, Eleanor Drinkwater from Western Sydney University, and Marissa Parrott from Zoos Victoria. So, Mick, can I hand over to you to just introduce yourself a little bit, and then you can throw on to the rest.
Yeah. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I got the privilege of living and working on the unceded lands of the Tamarang Nation, and I'd like to acknowledge the deep and ongoing connectivity or connection to country that the mob I work with and for have, and acknowledge their wonderful leaders, past, present, and emerging. Yeah. So my name's Mick Hansby. I'm the Senior Advisor for Cultural Forest Research and Management for the Tanarung Land and Waters Council. And I work in what's called the Cultural Land Management Team, and we're largely concerned at this point in time with trying to reform rights and access to for the Tanarung Nation to kind of care and heal Tanarung country. So I kind of work in the forest space and the fire space mainly, and yeah, I've had a lot over the last few years to do with the wonderful Bogong moth, or Talarong language, Deborah. And I think it's a great chance to be with this team and have a bit of a yarn about them in an informal way tonight. So, yeah, hand it over to Marissa.
Thanks, Mick. Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa. I'm the Senior Conservation Biologist from Zoos Victoria. And today I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and an area called Mullam Mullam, which means place of many large birds or many eagles. So I'm really privileged to live here and to be surrounded by all those beautiful birds. I do a lot of work with a lot of different people, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and the elders of all of the people who are on lands that the bogong moth travels across, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. The bogong moth is such an amazing species that moves across so many lands. I started work with another species, the critically endangered mountain pygmy possum, more than 18 years ago, and their future and their life history is intricately linked with bogong moths. So by default, I've been working with bogong moths for nearly 2 decades, but particularly the last 6 years, you'll hear about the bogong moths collapse. And since then, I've been working very intensively with bogong moths, and particularly with Moth Tracker, which you'll be hearing about a little bit more tonight. And I will hand over now to Eleanor. Thanks.
Hi, thanks very much, Marissa. So I'm Eleanor Drinkwater, and I'm coming to you from Durag in Gundungurra country, again up in the beautiful Blue Mountains where Kate's based. And for me, I'm from the UK originally and have been lured across the sea in order to have the opportunity to study this amazing, charismatic animal, and as well as some amazing people as well who have all sorts of incredible connections with this incredible creature. So yeah, I feel really lucky to be here today to study the species and to chat with all of you guys.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, and I mean, when we're acknowledging country that bogong moth flies across, we're pretty well talking about the whole continent, and also some of the trans-Tasman islands, and also our neighbours over in New Zealand that just in the last couple of weeks we've seen bogong moths showing up in New Zealand, possibly not a surprise given the really strong winds we've had coming across from the west. So really cool, yeah. Hopefully a little moth that can continue to unite people as it has done for thousands of years. So to start us off tonight, you guys have sent us in some questions, and that's been wonderful for us to have a look through. I've got them up here on a spreadsheet next to me, so we can try to get to as many as we can. And we want to just really start the conversation off with posing the question of why bogong moths are important and why they're iconic. And I'd like to ask Mick to start us off there, to give us his perspective.
Thank you, Kate. That's a great question. I think I might start by just kind of relaying a bit of a story. One of the privileges I've had is to kind of spend quite a bit of time with young Tanarung mob, and it's helped me learn about my own Indigenous ancestry. I'm a Gomeroi man, and so we're kind of from the Liverpool Plains, from the lava ground, so the other end of the life cycle. And when I first got involved with Bogong moths, it was through the partnership with the University of Melbourne, and we were essentially tasked with going to find the moths. Where are they on Tanarung country? Why are they special? Is it just in these high alpine peaks? Are there, springtime campsites? And so as a person who has spent a lot of time in the mountains over my career, I've got a background in forest science and native forestry. It got lots of cogs turning. And I think one of the most amazing experiences was in probably 2022. So we're looking at probably one of the very bottom of the populations. And we spent a lot of time not finding moths, going to places like Mount Sterling and Buller and Mount Buffalo, seeing really low numbers, working with Melanie Wong from the uni. So we're out basically doing this kind of scattergun approach across the landscape, and finally ending up at a reasonably low peak on the northern edge of Tanarung country, well, the northern edge of the mountains on Tanarung country, called Mount Talbrook or G-Bud. And it's a really great cave site, reasonably low, but it's got a really nice remnant population of alpine snowgum, Eucalyptus pulsiflora subspecies Niphophila. And finding a great population on the walls, and having 3 traditional owners with me, and we actually got in the cave and watching those young lads kind of get very emotional and high five and hugs, and we got the trangia and we collected a few and cooked them up, and that kind of experience really got my cogs turning about what this particular species is to traditional owners, right? And there's some phrases that we use with things like seasonal abundance, and ceremony and song lines and energy flux and landscape scale relationality. And all of these talk about the importance of this particular species. We know, and many of you probably do as well, that the annual influx of bogong moths allow animals to be in the high country in time over the summer, when there's often not a lot of other protein sources coming. So having the really high concentrations in the peaks allowed Tanarung mob and lots of other highland traditional owners to gather and perform ceremony, and those important linkages across mobs during that time and allowing people to be up and do business is an amazing thing to think through. With that ceremony comes the movement through country. And so this is talking about how mob would manage country on their way up and from these particular high peak sites. And so we're starting to talk about, this idea of ceremony and song lines being interlinked, and when we think about how a range of country types, vegetation communities, we use country type in a slightly different way. It's a little bit broader in its context and incorporates other parts of the knowledge system, not just the biophysical, but country kind of talks about, you know, ancestral spiritual connections and also social cultural connections. So country is this big broad thing, and a country type brings in that concept too. And when we start to talk about country type in the highlands, we use Deborah Bogong moth as a cultural keystone to talk about that highland landscape and the way it can, you know, connect different parts of the, you know, lowland to the highland system, not only through ceremony and song lines, but also through this kind of influx of energy and nutrients that the moths bring every year. So you start thinking about this and you're like, wow, this little critter's got a lot going for it, right? As a person who spent a lot of time in my career thinking about eucalypt seed, and after the 1920, the Black Summer bushfires, I was running a very large seed collection program down here in Victoria, chasing things like alpine ash in particular. And when we first started to really think about like what's causing this crash in moth population, one of the connections that I thought is of interest and reasonably unexplored still is this potential connection of Bogong moth, Deborah, as a pollinator. And we've seen, so Josh Coates put out some great work in 2023, I think, which was really interesting, and it kind of echoed some of the observations we'd seen where we've had huge flowering events in alpine species that haven't carried into a seed crop. And it's like, wow, what's going on here? And there are probably some climatic discussions around that, but also it's like, well, if you've got a historic population in the billions of this animal, and the evidence is showing they're not just estivated, not just hanging out in caves, they're actually feeding. Like, what is the nectar source in the landscape at that time of year that can support a population like that? Flowering eucalypts. And so we're really interested in that connection because that really starts to bring in a broader discussion that's not just moths and pygmy possums, it's the whole alpine landscape and its importance as a pollinator. And so when we then talk about that landscape approach, we're really then starting to talk about this idea of relationships and cross landscape relationships, and not just between all of the parts of that web, but we're also talking about cross community relationships. And so all of a sudden there's a connection from my mob from Gunnedah on the Liverpool Plains potentially to Mount Torbreck on Tunaran country, and that's a fantastic thing to consider when we think about this little insect that is often the poor cousin to something like a charismatic possum like the pygmy possum. And we're really starting to go, well, hold on, this is probably as much of an interesting story as other species that we kind of focus on at times. So yeah, there's some of my thoughts. As I said, the privilege of working in these landscapes with community has been a joy, and I'm glad to be having a yarn about it. So
yeah, amazing. Finally, you guys finally found moths, you know, that summer. I mean, that would have been really, really important. You can imagine that will stay with you for a long time. It was pretty scary. I know Eric Warrant describes his experience of going up to one of the caves on Cozzy and walking in there, just sort of walking in, you know, about to do stuff and going, what?
yeah,
What do you mean there's no moths in here? There's no moths anywhere. Now, I think that was in 2017, that time, and it's taken them a good while to get back to even any kind of numbers at all.
Yeah.
I was talking to ABC Canberra this afternoon because there's a lot of moths in Canberra apparently at the moment, and people are seeing them feeding on the eucalypts.
Great.
Yeah. And you know, they're sort of like, are they back? What's going on? You know, we're full of bogong moths again, and you know, so it's great. But people are talking about sort of a 30 to 50% recovery from prior to 2017. I'm not sure if you're seeing similar kind of if you guys have got a bit of a vibe for it down in Victoria.
Well, we haven't been able to start our annual monitoring program yet. We're actually getting up next week to set our cameras. And unfortunately, one of our key monitoring sites, which is the kind of area around Mount Buffalo, has been put off out of bounds by a sovereign citizen at the moment. So we'll be focusing on one particular mountain, Mount Torbreck G-Bar. But yeah, we'll be up having a look. So I'm hopeful. And another thing that we've been investigating, and this is something that many people probably haven't thought of before, and we certainly hadn't until I came across a very random doctoral thesis by a guy called Ben Keeney, is the fact that bogong moths, at their estivation sites, they build up a peat, right? And that is another paleoenvironmental record, which will enable us to kind of interrogate the past a little bit. You know, you've got your standard dendrochronology and, you know, wetland or peatland coring. This is another record. We had Ben up like the start of the year in March, and we took a couple of calls out of G-Bar, and Ben was very impressed with the peats, and he's expecting to get potentially a 2,000-year history out of it. And the cool thing about moth peat is it preserves hair and fur. And so you get your standard, you know, charcoal pollen history out of it, but you also get a record of the animals that have been in there. And we're extremely excited about this because who knows what it might show up. So
it's hugely exciting. Yeah. So to sort of maybe fill in a few of the gaps for folks there. So, you know, in these places where moths, you know, spend the summer, a lot of them don't make it through the summer, you know, a lot of them die. And so they land on the bottom of these caves. And, you know, of course, moths have been doing this for thousands upon thousands of years. And so over time, because these areas are quite cool and oftentimes there's not a lot of water moving through the systems, you get this buildup of, yeah, exactly what Mick's describing. And so then, yeah, it has this sort of time series, you know, from the top to the bottom, just like any kind of rock record or anything like that. And yeah, it potentially holds wonderful secrets. So it'll be really interesting to see.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mick. So this kind of leads us a little bit on to the next question we wanted to cover, which we're asking Eleanor to lead us on, which is around what science has learned about bogong moths, which is a very, very large question. So you get to pick and choose, but you know, we're thinking about science, of course, in the broadest sense, not just Western science, but all sciences and all ways of knowing.
Well, first of all, you know, a hard act to follow, hearing all about the amazing science which Mick's team is leading on. So, like, you know, just to acknowledge that it's a hard act to follow. So what I thought might be useful is I'm not sure who on the call where people's bogong knowledge might be. So I thought it might be useful to kind of quickly whiz around what we do know and what we don't know about the migration itself. So what we think is happening is that we might be looking at one of the world's longest insect migrations, which is incredibly exciting. And we think that you have these moths going from possibly the top of northern New South Wales all the way down to the high country around Kosciuszko and many of the caves up there every year, where they kind of spend the hottest part of the year up in these caves in a state called estivation before taking this enormous migration all the way back. And there's been a lot of really interesting research into the incredible mechanisms that allow these insects to go these enormous distances. Particularly work by Eric Warrant and the rest of his lab have shown that they are probably migrating based on cues from the Earth's magnetic field, as well as guidance from the stars at night, using all sorts of kind of really, really clever neural jiggery-pokery in order to allow them to make this incredibly long migration. So we know that they're migrating, we know that they're using these really clever mechanisms, but there's still really interesting questions about exactly where they're going and what routes they're taking. So we know that other species of migratory insects sometimes take one route, sometimes take another route. And so, you know, even if we know that there's a particular route one year, it might be changing in different years. So we know that they're migrating, but the exact routes are kind of still very unclear. We also know that you get bogong moths across the areas I've just described, but you also get this really interesting population right in the west around Perth. And there's a lot of interesting questions about whether there's another migration going from Perth across the Nullarbor and up into the mountains, which would be really interesting if it's happening as well. But unfortunately, as well as knowing that this interesting migration is happening, we also know that there is trouble on the Bogong front, as Mick's kind of spoken about already. We have observed that there's been kind of slow declines in the population, but then in 2017 there was this enormous crash, and suddenly the Bogongs weren't in the cave where they were expected to be. And on top of that kind of fluctuation in populations, we're also seeing concerns about climate change and the impacts this might have, particularly on the populations when they are in these East of Asian sites. So particularly kind of your work, Kate, showing that at higher temperatures, you don't see these East of Asian behaviors, you see kind of more and more activity, which raises a lot of concerns about what's going to happen to these amazing species as the climate shifts and things get warmer. And we've already been seeing the fact that they, in the lower caves where we used to see them, we're no longer finding them where we would expect them to be. And there's the suggestion that they might be moving to higher and higher and cooler sites. But unfortunately for Australia, the mountains are not very high. So, you know, it's a really interesting but also really concerning issue that this amazing species is facing. And also, then this is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in the species. You know, this is an amazing species with a lot of charisma. A lot of people care so much about the species, which is really under threat from climate change, but is one of an amazing ecosystem of other species which are also under threat. So in a way, the plight of this species kind of helps to draw attention to some of the amazing other critters like the alpine stonefly and all the other insects and wonderful critters that are in those areas.
That's it.
Yes.
The
most charismatic.
It up.
I had to get the alpine stonefly in there. They're wonderful.
They're too good. I know they're too good. Brilliant, Eleanor. Marissa, Mick, do you want to add anything to Eleanor's lovely summary of the, you know, some of the highlights of Bogong moth, pub trivia?
No, well, I just think the statement around climate driving them higher is just really relevant because, like, essentially, we're just going to run out of hill, right? We basically, like, Mount Torbreck's at 1560. You know, it's amazing that you've got alpine snow gum on it, not one of your lower subspecies. You know, and we've got much higher sites, but they may not be as ideal as estivation sites. So, you know, or accessible, you know, for ceremonial sites, right? So,
right. So yeah, even if the moth can find a place, we risk losing all kinds of really important cultural, you know, all kinds of things can be lost. So yeah, it's never about one thing, right? It's never about one little element. It's about the whole. And just to put that in perspective for folks who aren't familiar with the elevation or height of every mountain in Australia, which, you know, apparently there's people that don't know all those things. So Mount Cosie is around 2,228 meters. So Mount Torbreck being at 1,500 is, you know, is very low for moths to use because they tend to prefer these peaks at 1,900 and 2,000 meters. Yeah. Thanks, Mick. Yeah, awesome. Marissa, would you like to add anything to the science, or would you like to dive into, you know, what's happening on the citizen science front?
I can do both if that suits. And yeah, just reiterating everything Mick and Eleanor mentioned, it's just such an amazing species to be able to fly up to 1,000 kilometres or even more from their breeding grounds every year up to the Alps, and then make the return trip back again, another 1,000 kilometres for such a small insect is just remarkable.
And having never done it before. Having never done it before. I mean, that's, you know, that's the really interesting, you know, piece of the puzzle, isn't it? That they haven't had their parents, you know, to follow their parents like birds or whatever. They somehow have it encoded that this is what you do. Yeah.
That's right.
Sorry,
they only live for a year.
It's a really important bit.
No, it's a really, you know, they hatch, they live underground, they come up and eat broadleaf plants, and then they make this amazing migration when they've only just gotten their wings, and then stay up in the Alps and then are able to fly all the way again and then die. So they're just such a remarkable animal, and something that Mick touched on as well, that they're so important not only for everywhere they migrate and the pollination, but up in the Alps, they used to arrive in numbers around 4 billion was the estimate. And then they collapsed by 99.5%. And that was just such an absolute shock. It's such a problem for the Bogong moth, which is now listed as an endangered species, but they're the second biggest nutrient influx into the Alps after the sun every year. And that means every different species up there, from the tiny soil fungi to the plants, to the birds, the mammals, the reptiles, the frogs, other invertebrates, and of course the important cultural implications and people, everything revolves around Bogong moths. And so if we lose them, we really do lose everything. It's so important that we care for them, that we get them back to where they should be. And there's a way everyone can help. So I might jump into the second bit you mentioned, and that is citizen science. Because, you know, the moths are amazing. They make this giant migration, but that means they're traveling over a really wide distance, and it means they're really hard to track. And as Eleanor highlighted, there's a lot we don't know about where are they coming from, how are they traveling every year, what are their numbers like every year. And so back in 2019, after that horrific collapse in 2017 and 2018, we thought, how can we learn more about the moths so we can help them? And so we launched Moth Tracker, which is a citizen science website to track the migration of the Bogong moth, to try and learn more so we can help them and the other species that rely on them. And there are a few different aims for Moth Tracker. One, of course, is working out where are the moths coming from, where are they going to, where they might be drawn away from their migration and run into other threats, what are their numbers looking like, so we can help to protect this endangered species. It's also an early detection system for us, so we can try and work out what's happening for the moths each year, but also for other animals that rely on them. We've mentioned the critically endangered mountain pygmy possum. So if moths are going to be very low one year, that gives us an early indication that we may need to step in and help other animals like the mountain pygmy possums. For example, we've developed a supplementary food, Bogong bickies, not made from Bogong moths, made from readily available nuts and seeds and mealworms and other delicious things that replicate the vitamins and nutrients and minerals in Bogong moths. So we can then deploy those if needed, like they were after the Black Summer fires in New South Wales. So that's another important aim. And the third one is just raising awareness, because it's such an awesome species, but there's a lot we don't know, and people remember them coming over at night and blocking out the stars and the moon, but they haven't seen as many Bogong moths recently, and there are some misconceptions about them. So people do believe that often Bogong moths are huge, you know, the size of your head or your hand. They're actually really small. They're tiny but mighty. They're about an inch long in their body, about 5 centimeters wide with their wings out. So they're quite small. They actually weigh 0.33 of a gram on average, which is less than a Tic Tac. So just imagine that tiny little Tic Tac flying all the way up and down. They're remarkable. You can see the size on the images behind me. So I put some of our Moth Tracker images. That's next to a bread clip, and that's a fully grown adult Bogong moth. And there's another one on the other side of me too. So they are quite small. They can be grey through to chocolate brown. They have a dark stripe on each wing and a little lighter point or a little lighter circle at the top and kidney shape at the bottom, which are quite silvery. So they're a distinctive moth. But what we'd love to do through Moth Tracker is raise that awareness so people do recognise the Bogong moths and which moths they are. All the other moths are important too, but the Bogongs are the ones we're looking for, just about the size of the tip of your thumb. And when people think they might have seen one, there's a way they can help them. And so that is by taking a photo, even if you're not certain if it's a Bogong moth or not, take a photo, upload it to the Moth Tracker website. It's quick and easy. You don't need to log in. You don't need to download an app. You just pop onto the website and say where you were, when you saw them, how many there were. Was it 1, 10? Was it a whole swarm? We get very excited when we get swarms coming in on Moth Tracker. And we'll then verify it for you. So our moth maestros, including people on the screen here and at Zoos Victoria, go through and we recognise, you know, which are the Bogong moths, and we pop those on an interactive map. So you can even check back later and see if your moth was actually a Bogong moth. So that way we can get that information from those wider areas. We have thousands of sightings which have come in. Here we go. There's Moth Tracker in the current season. So we've got thousands of sightings that have come in across the years from all states and territories. We've had some wonderful sightings from places like WA, where we don't know much about the moths, and from South Australia in previous years. This year, we've had sightings from New Zealand as well, with those winds that Kate mentioned. And so all of that information helps us to work out, where are they in trouble? Thanks for sharing that, Kate. That was excellent. And then also we can use that for other projects. So it's really important for projects to protect the moths, to find and protect their habitat. The information's been loaded to the Atlas of Living Australia. It's been lodged with state and federal governments. So if you see bogong moths and log them on Moth Tracker, you can really make a difference. So please do log them. You can help us to help them through citizen science. It's a really powerful tool.
Thanks, Marissa. And it is so exciting, isn't it, when they come, when you see those, like the little, like the ones, oh, look, there's one, way out west, maybe that's just hatched, maybe they were breeding there that year, it's super cool. And I think we need an influx of people helping, don't we? So we don't have enough observations to be able to answer the questions that we want to answer with the amount that we have. So we do need more folks getting involved in Moth Tracker to help us, because in the US, for example, data like these are used to describe the monarch butterfly movements all the time, because there's lots and lots and lots of people getting involved. Even though we don't have as many people as we have in the US, we still have enough people in Australia to make this work. So yeah, we just need a greater proportion of folks. But we know that Aussies love to get behind a bogong moth, so that's no problem.
and just to jump in there, like, there are teams, our team, and I'm sure other teams as well, we're watching as every single point pops up, and we'll be literally there with our field gear packed, waiting for your points to pop up. And the moment they pop up in certain areas, we'll get in our car and we'll drive there. I mean, not to your point specifically, but really, really important. These, we're really using every piece of data that comes in.
It's hugely valuable. We can piece it together with all kinds of different things that we're working on. So, for example, Eleanor's been looking through the endless records on Trove of bogong moths popping up in newspapers, and collecting people's stories from when they were kids about bogong moths, people that are interested in sharing those stories. We can use that information from stories. I remember, when I was a kid and I was living in Wagga, and it was my brother was 5, so it was probably 1972 or whatever, and we had this huge night where there was those kinds of stories are so useful to try to piece together and kind of retrofit really huge bogong moth years in particular places, and what the weather was doing and what the rain was doing, and try to correlate all of these things together so we can try to build up a picture over time of what influences the bogong moth migration, what leads to big years and small years, and all of those sorts of things. So even though it might feel like a small anecdote to you, it can be hugely important information. And you can find a place to share that information if you go to bogong.org. So there's all kinds of things on bogong.org, including how to go on Moth Tracker and what different groups are doing. And you can sign up to a newsletter to find out, all the different groups around Australia, what kind of research is happening, and also in Sweden. There's research groups all over the world working on these critters. All right. So, we've gone through, Marissa's talked about Moth Tracker. There's one really important thing that people can do to help, but there's obviously a lot more things as well that don't just benefit bogong moths, but benefit all kinds of insects and the broader environment, and that's always, they're really often the same things. They are: try to plant native plants in your garden, try to have a messy garden, try to have flowering plants in your garden, or whatever patch, you have some kind of say over. Avoid pesticides, unless it's the absolute most extreme scenario. It's very hard to imagine outside of, it's really heavy agricultural things, what we could possibly need pesticides for in our urban environments that, that could jeopardize these kinds of critters. Put pressure on your local councils to reduce the sprays, in parks and playgrounds and all that kind of stuff. All these things really, really help, these sorts of little critters have a place. And, and as we heard from Mick, bogongs need pollen and they need nectar as they come through. So if we've got flowering plants, if you've got flowering ukes or whatever in your garden, chances are the bogong moths might be needing them as they come through. What things have I missed that people can do to help?
Jump in with a couple there as well. Things like turning off unnecessary outdoor lights. So remember, lights off for the bogong moth while they're migrating, they can be drawn down from their migration to bright lights that we don't actually need to have on outside. And that's the same for all invertebrates. You know, other invertebrates can be drawn down there too and become kind of trapped near those lights, or they run into cats or foxes or dogs or other predators. So turn off outdoor unnecessary lights, and that will help the moths go on their migration. And another one is, if you do get a moth inside your house, and they do come and visit sometimes, you can just very carefully pop a cup over it and then take it outside and let it go. They're not going to hurt you. We get that question a bit, you know, what's up with Bogong moths? You know, are they a problem? Could they be a problem in my house or eat my clothes? No, they can't. As we've heard, they love plants. They're actually really important. They're not going to do any damage. They're not going to hurt you. They're not going to get in your clothes. But every single female can lay up to 2,000 eggs. And so each female is really important, and each male too. So every moth is critical. Make sure you can just safely pop them outside and they can go on their way. Does anyone else have some to add as well to those?
I think that's a good list. I noticed that we've got a great question from Esther. They're wondering about the difference between putting Bogong moth observations on Moth Tracker versus iNaturalist. And the answer is, Esther, it doesn't matter actually whether you put them on iNaturalist or you put them on Moth Tracker or where you put them, because they all end up at this in this repository called the Atlas of Living Australia, which is, if you don't know about it, Google it and check it out, because you won't come out for like a week, because it's got records. It's got the publicly available, you know, the records that it's okay for everybody to see of every species in Australia, not just insects, not just, you know, it's everything. It's absolutely awesome. And most countries don't have a resource like that. It's super cool. So Moth Tracker is really convenient and a lovely place to put your observations. But if you happen to be like an epic iNaturalist user and you want to pop your Bogong moths up there, by all means, you know, it all goes to the same place and it all helps. Yeah, it's just nice to be able to give people a couple of different options so that people can do whatever it is that they'd prefer, just to share that information. So yeah, thanks for that question. That's a great idea. That's a great one. All right, so we had a couple of really specific questions from folks that we might jump into. So the first one was around Bogong moths bringing arsenic to the Alps. So it's a really interesting observation that was made about 25 years ago, 2000. That can't be true. Where Ken Green, who's a famous, in our circles anyway, a famous ecologist that's worked in Kosciuszko National Park for millennia and calls himself a rat catcher from Jindabyne, but he's actually one of Australia's people in Australia with the most incredible knowledge of our alpine systems. And he noticed one day that, you know, that there was all these moths washed out of some of these east of Asian sites, these caves, and by some big storms that had come through. And where the moths were lying dead, all the grass was dead. Absolutely everything, all the vegetation around this little group of moths that had been washed out was dead. And, you know, that really intrigued him, like, what's going on here? How could that possibly be? And so he sent a whole bunch off for testing and came back that they were, you know, loaded up with arsenic. And then after that, a couple of years later, saw a similar pattern, and also sent those off, not just for arsenic, but for looking at a range of different potential chemicals that were in the moths' bodies. Yeah, and so and the conclusions from that work, there's only been a couple of bits of work on that topic, but those two papers show that it's very likely that the arsenic was coming from outside of the Alps and being brought in by the moths, but the source of that arsenic, and the question was specifically from the person in the webinar was asking how do they get the arsenic into their bodies, is not known. Yeah, Mick, do you have any more insights into that? I just noticed you started writing things down. I thought you might have had. Yeah, it's a really interesting observation.
Yeah. We've not seen anything like that on Tauranga country, but
yeah,
we're definitely on the lookout. You know.
Yeah, you know, it's fascinating, and you know, having a look and seeing what kind of potential active chemicals and pesticides and things like that might be present in the moths arriving in the mountains is a really interesting area that, you know, would be interesting to pursue. So thanks for that question. It's a really good one. And sorry, I should say the reason that we know that, well, the reason that the evidence was put forward about why the arsenic is not coming from the mountains, but rather being accumulated somewhere outside the mountains, is because moths were intercepted in Dubbo and in Sydney, I think, in Canberra, and also possibly up at Mount Capita, but certainly Canberra and Dubbo, and those moths already had those same levels of arsenic as they were seeing in the mountains. So some pretty convincing evidence that this is coming from outside and coming in. So yeah, really interesting one. You know, exactly what it means and what the implications are is very unclear, but that was just a really neat observation. All right, so the next question we have is around how we can help bogong moths survive, and in particular, what gardeners could look out for so they don't accidentally damage or kill bogong moth larvae. Eleanor, do you want to jump onto that one?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, this is a wonderful question, and it's always great when gardeners love looking after things that will probably eat some of your some of your plants, and embracing that. So the bogong moths are part of a group which are called cutworms. So you might see kind of stalks that have been kind of cut off at the top, which might be a bogong moth, or it might be another one within something called the agrotis, which includes bogong moths, but also several other kind of closely related species. So if you see evidence of cutworm, it might be bogong moth, or it might be something else. But the kind of key things to look after bogong moths that might be in your garden or on your property, we kind of recommend the same things for kind of looking after your looking after the wildlife. They are pretty cute, aren't they? What's my train of thought now? Oh yes, the species in your garden in general. So things like you might have heard of having certain months where you don't mow, making sure that you avoid using different chemicals. And in fact, I'd want to refer you to Invertebrates Australia actually have a healthy wildlife friendly garden pledge as well. So if you want to head over to their website, they've got some tips as well as a pledge for gardeners. So that's kind of on the gardening level, but also I just want to flag, as we chatted about earlier, you know, one of the big threats, as well as the stuff that's happening in gardens, is also that the bigger questions of climate change. So if you're a climate warrior, then, you know, write into your local council. Getting involved in reducing climate activities is also something to do. So kind of two levels of actions that you can get involved in depending on what you're passionate about.
Yeah, and we don't really know, we don't have enough knowledge yet about the breeding grounds to really be able to say, like, oh, you know, folks in this particular suburb, you know, your gardens, you know, there seems to be that the breeding grounds are so spread out, and oftentimes we think that they're, you know, more in Western New South Wales, Northern New South Wales, Southern Queensland, and rural Victoria. But then as this story unrolls, and as we learn more about bogong moths, as we go to the museums and digitize all the little tiny pin labels and go, oh my God, this one was found north of Broome, and oh my God, this one was found, like, it's, you know, the story is getting more and more complex about where exactly it is that they're breeding. So, you know, the best thing to do for bogong moths is really the best thing to do for all the critters in your backyard. Thanks,
I
Anna.
think that's just such a fantastic point, that we really should be caring more for all of our invertebrates. The bogong moths are a wonderful sort of keystone species that we can look to because they're so amazing and they're so mighty, but anything we do for them is going to benefit all these other species as well. So not using insecticides, as Eleanor said, writing in and highlighting concerns about the use of insecticides by agriculture. We certainly know that in the European Union, they've banned 225 pesticides, and in Australia it's 24. So we really are lagging behind the rest of the world in caring for our invertebrates, in reducing those toxins. There are ways that people can be more sustainable and do their own bit for climate change and lobby as well. So I think there are things that everyone can do to help the bogong moth that are then going to help all the other amazing invertebrates too, and the ones that Invertebrates Australia works on as well.
And Zoos Victoria.
And us too. That's
and
right.
Tamarong.
That's right.
Everybody's jumping in. Yeah, there's plenty to be going on with, that's for sure. All right, we have a question about what their numbers are looking like this year. So as Mick alluded to before, like we can't get up there because there's so much bloody snow this year, which is a lovely problem to have, but quite unexpected. So yeah, so most of us aren't able to get into any of these sites yet, but dispatches from the Brindabellas and other mountains in the ACT, Namadgi and so on, are that we're seeing moths in good numbers at the lower elevation sites as they move up into the higher elevation sites, like the famous Mount Gingera places that Bogong moths have been visiting for thousands of years. The Ngambri and the Ngunnawal people have been, seriously important to those folks, and very spiritual and important cultural places, and also places that they've been researched for since the 1950s. So yeah, so looking pretty good, but there's like the folks down in Cozzy are reporting that Bogong moths are arriving in Charlotte Pass and landing on snow. So yeah, an interesting season this year. We were saying before we jumped on that the really poor rain in autumn in Victoria, and the really, like we had a lot of rain in New South Wales in autumn and winter this year. We were interested to see if that flows on to the mountains in those same states, and we see low numbers in Victorian mountains and higher numbers in New South Wales mountains, or not. So that's going to be a very interesting pattern to see as the season progresses. So yeah, we had a question: are we likely to find Bogong moths in the suburbs? So I don't know the location of the person that asked this question, but Marissa, what do you think? Yes.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I can definitely give a yes for that question. I think that's a great question because you could really find Bogong moths just about anywhere. We've had positive verified Bogong moth sightings come in from every Australian state and territory except the Northern Territory. But if you do think you've seen one up there, do log it on Moth Tracker and we'll verify it for you if it is a Bogong moth. But you might find Bogong moths in the suburbs, in the cities, on your way to school or work, in your house. They might be in a national park or a local park. So really,
one of my friends found one in his undies the other day. One of my friends found one in his undies on the washing line.
Oh my goodness, it was on the washing line. Yes, do keep an eye out for them on the washing line. But I've rescued a Bogong moth from my dog's beanbag that she was about to sit on, so I managed to scooch the little moth out safely before a large dog sat on the little moth. So they really could turn up anywhere, so do keep an eye out for them. This year we've had some Bogong moth verified sightings, small numbers from places like Queensland and South Australia. We've had slightly better numbers, though lower than usual, from Victoria, and really good numbers from the ACT and New South Wales. So they are on the move now. As everyone has been saying, the drought in Victoria is a concern. So it is concerning we're seeing slightly lower numbers coming across Victoria than we have seen in previous years. But hopefully those numbers will start to pick up. Hopefully there'll be really good numbers coming from up north as well. So far this year, we've had 415 sightings come in to Moth Tracker since the 1st of September, and 178 of those, from memory, have been verified as Bogong moths. So we've got some good numbers coming in. The moths are travelling now, which is really exciting. It's lower than 2024. So going back to that question you were just talking about there, Kate, about numbers this year, 2024 last season was really high numbers, our highest on record on Moth Tracker. But this year is still looking a bit higher than the other years from 2019 to 2023. So hopefully this will be another good year for Bogong moths, but some concerns from Victoria and some of those other areas, and none from WA yet that have been verified. So no matter where you are in Australia and New Zealand, if you're checking in from there, because we have had 2 from New Zealand this year verified as Bogong moths, please do keep an eye out. They could be anywhere. Keep an eye out in your daily, going for a walk, going to work or similar. And if you do think you've seen a Bogong moth, you can check it out on the Moth Tracker website. You can just Google or use your search engine to look for that. Go through the Zoos Victoria website, go through Bogong Watch website, or go straight to mothtracker.swift with 2 Fs.net.au. We're really easy to find, and every sighting helps us learn more about this amazing species. Could be anywhere.
I've been popping, in
Mm.
case people haven't noticed it, I've been popping all kinds of links that we've talked about as we've talked about them into the chat function. You can't write back in the chat, but I can post things in the chat. And I've got a couple of other really lovely questions coming in on the Q&A. So Esther has a question around what detection methods are being used other than citizen scientists visually spotting them. It's an excellent question. So eDNA cameras, you know, do they have chew patterns as caterpillars that could be recognized? And do they make ultrasonic noises when flying? So a range of questions. What I can say is that there's certainly lots of people out looking. There's also we're mixed group, my group. I think Marissa, your group as well are putting out all kinds of camera traps. We're trying to really create a network of camera traps up in the East of Asian sites. We're also developing automated bug lanterns. So we're trying to develop insect, basically they're light traps. So like a light with a board that an insect can land on, and then a camera is looking at that board, and that which is attached to a computer, and that computer is able to either identify things in real time and send that information back to a centralized hub, or those images get sent back to a centralized hub for ID. And of course, you can train AI classifiers and all kinds of clever things in order to speed that process up. So we're working together on trying to solve those big problems, but these are kind of technological networks that don't exist in Australia yet. So we're really up against it in terms of trying to get these projects up, funded, running, coordinated. And the Bogong moth is providing a great opportunity to say, hey, we really need this, this critter's in danger, and there's plenty more behind it. Mick, did you want to
Can
jump in?
Yeah, I'll just add that like we use a range of methods, like the stuff that Kate's been talking about, the kind of more automated approaches are wonderful, still in development. We also use, and they'll really help us understand the kind of migration patterns over time, particularly the arrival and departure periods. But we also use standard UV light bucket traps,
Yep.
and we find that there's a multiple use function for these things, because not only are they telling us, from a physical point of view, are there moths in this particular location, but it gets mob on country and it re-establishes that connection. And we find that that is as useful. So this kind of bicultural relationship that we're trying to develop with this animal, as using more advanced methods over time. So we will continue to advocate for a range of methods depending on the case. And, we light trapping is easy and inexpensive. And, it's a joy to watch mob get up and actually get a hold of these things and actually see them. So, yeah.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, we just had a question. Someone in the chat asked, could you explain what a light trap is? So I quickly wrote down a couple of things, but yeah, it's literally just a light, and it might be in front of a sheet or it might be attached to a bucket. And sometimes there's fancy lights with particular colors that moths really like. But yeah, typically it's kind of almost what it sounds like,
Pretty low tech.
Yeah, so it's pretty much, yeah, like sometimes we're still running these things on motorbike batteries, but nowadays more on power banks. But but we're working on trying to get the prices down, even try to get them made in Australia and that kind of stuff, because they're typically more scientific equipment than available to your average family, which is a real shame and something we want to work on, because every family needs a bug lantern, in my opinion. We could have, people helping out all across the country. We have a comment and a question for from Estelle, just to say that for those of us who haven't seen bogong moths in their caves, except in photos, I'd love to hear more about what this is like and what behaviours happen at the East of Asian sites. I think this would be a lovely way to kind of round off the webinar. So yeah, everyone, it's hard to kind of express just how impactful and wonderful it is to stand on the top of a mountain at sunset and see thousands upon thousands upon thousands of moths suddenly all together emerge from the cracks and crevices around you and fly around in this wonderful kind of, well, what's called a maelstrom. It's the name of
Maelstrom.
the name that it's been given. I don't actually know what the history of that word is, but that's the name that's been kind of attached to this the moths just flying around. Really interestingly, they do it, seems like every day after sunset and every day just before sunrise, before they spend the whole day in their little cracks and crevices in their granite boulder fields and other kinds of, East Ovation sites. In New South Wales, it's granite boulder fields, but in Victoria, the East Ovation sites look different, different rocks, all that sort of thing. But the similar kind of behaviors. Yeah, so you imagine standing on the top of Mount Kosciuszko looking west, the sun has just set, so the sky is orange and purple and blue, and all of a sudden, it's just this incredible number of moths flying around, and we can share some videos. So because you've registered for this webinar, we can contact you after and we can share a video with you that was taken on a recent trip to the top of Mount Kosciuszko to witness this. It's a really, really, really amazing thing to see. And it is one of the things, I mean, it's no wonder that, First Nations people for thousands of years have revered this moth as being an important critter, because it's just too wonderful really to describe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Oh,
I was going to say absolutely agree. Being able to stand up there and just have the moths go around you, and it just feels like you're, surrounded by fairies or surrounded by some truly amazing little creature that's just buffeting into you and moving around. But I think one of the questions was around the behavior in caves. And I think one of the really cool things is that they do this behavior called tiling, where they actually sit over the top of each other, and you can get something like 17,000 per square meter, where they sit like little roof tiles over the top of each other as protection and to sort of conserve energy, and just to cover the walls of the cave like that is truly remarkable. So they do have amazing behaviours, not just in their migration, but also when they're up in the Alps and are in there tiling across the walls of the caves and then coming out into that gorgeous maelstrom. So it's something that I feel very privileged to have seen, and something you can look up even in photos. They're just remarkable to see.
Mick, did you want to jump in?
I was just looking at Carl's question, something that we've noticed last season would
About
be
the pest.
pests.
Yep.
Yeah.
About
And I think
pesting, pest birds.
European wasps are probably something that really need to be considered. We found, up with Ben Keeney, he got very disturbed that we found a wasp nest not far from an excavation site. And Ben's commentary around this is, they'll just decimate particular sites once they get going. So, have our eyes peeled. I think there are many resources on how to deal with Euros, but it does present a challenge in the remote parts of our landscapes. But that would be something I'm increasingly concerned about.
Yeah. Well, I can announce that there's going to be a really exciting invertebrate sort of, oh gosh, what is it? We're going to get everybody out looking for bugs and recording all the bugs, especially the threatened ones and the invasive ones. We're trying to get everybody out. So this brand new program that's going to start just in a few weeks' time. It's called Bug Hunt. It's co-led by the Invasive Species Council, Invertebrates Australia, and is sponsored by Australian Geographic. And it's going to do exactly that, Mick. It's going to deal with that problem of, we want to know where the bogong moths are, but we also really want to know, where the invasive species are that could cause big problems. So, keep your eyes out for Bug Hunt, and yeah, get ready to get your macro camera going. Does anyone want to say anything more before I wrap up? We've got just 1 minute left.
I'd just like to say that this, remarkable insect is a truly great Australian story that talks about, landscape scale relationships and connectivity. And I think, people in the South, like myself, living down here, we focus on the mountains, but it's only part of the story. The other part of it is out in the lava fields and understanding the requirements. Obviously, we're in parts of the landscape that have been most heavily deforested. And so understanding the needs in this particular part of the landscape, what are our grassy woodlands meant to look like and how do they support moth larvae, is a truly great part of the story that connects us across this great landscape. So you know.
Beautiful, Mick. I'd just love to end on that. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Marissa. Thanks, Eleanor. Thanks, Mick, for joining us. And I hope you've all
Thank you.
enjoyed this webinar. And please jump on Invertebrates Australia and find out all the different ways that you can support our work on conserving invertebrates, and of course, work on the Bogong moth. Good night, everyone.